What if I told you that the single most life-altering decision you can make doesn't involve a career change, a relationship shift, or some massive breakthrough, but simply choosing to wake up at 4 a.m.? That may sound extreme, but biologically, neurologically, and behaviorally, it might be the most high leverage shift you'll ever make. Not because the hour itself is magical, but because of what happens inside your brain when you align with that time window. This isn't about hustle culture or trying to be a superhuman. It's about working with your nervous system to unlock clarity, discipline, and identity transformation. If you've struggled with anxiety, procrastination, or a lack of purpose, this is the protocol you've never been taught, but deeply need. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you won't just understand why waking at 4 a.m. matters. You'll feel a deep biological urgency to try it tomorrow. Let's begin with your internal clock, your circadian rhythm. This 24-hour rhythm governs not just sleep, but your energy, hormones, focus, and even emotional regulation. Around 4 a.m., your body begins what is known as the cortisol awakening response. Now, cortisol has a bad reputation as the stress hormone, but in the early morning, it plays a different role. It acts as your natural wake-up signal. When you rise in sync with this elevation, rather than after it, you align your entire system for alertness, clarity, and readiness. Think of it like catching the perfect wave. Everything moves easier. You're not fighting against your biology, you're surfing on it. Now here's where the real transformation starts. When you consistently get out of bed at 4 a.m., you engage the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for conscious decision making, long-term planning, and goal direction. Early in the morning, especially during the transition between sleep and wakefulness, this region is highly plastic, meaning it's more easily shaped and trained. When you resist the comfort of the sheets, override the desire to hit snooze, and choose discipline over indulgence, you send a powerful neurological signal, I am in control. This strengthens the circuitry between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, reducing impulsivity and building what we call top-down regulation. Over time, you're not just changing your routine, you're fundamentally altering the structure and function of your brain. This shift impacts your entire identity. When you commit to waking up early, especially when no one's watching, you begin to separate from your old patterns. There's a psychological and biological concept called neuroplasticity dependent identity. It means the behaviors you repeat under effort or friction actually tell your brain who you are. And when you wake up at 4 a.m. and step into your day with intention, your brain begins to map that identity. You're no longer trying to be disciplined. You are disciplined. You're no longer a person who hopes for motivation. You're the kind of person who acts in its absence. This is how transformation happens, not with information, but with deliberate action under discomfort. Another powerful advantage of the 4 a.m. window is cognitive silence. Before the world wakes up, before emails arrive, before texts, notifications, and noise, your brain operates in what neuroscientists call the default mode network. This network turns on when the brain is free from external tasks and distractions. It's responsible for reflection, vision casting, creative insight, and long-term planning. In those quiet hours, you access a depth of thought that is nearly impossible during the chaos of the day. Your thoughts aren't just clearer, they're more strategic. You begin your day ahead, not just in time, but in intention and mental sharpness. Waking up early also recalibrates your hormonal systems. Your testosterone levels, the hormone responsible for drive, focus, and physical energy, are most efficiently supported when your circadian rhythm is anchored early. Waking at 4 a.m. stabilizes your testosterone-cortisol balance, reducing the midday crashes and energy fluctuations many people experience. And here's something most people don't realize: rising early helps you sleep better at night. Because you're aligning your wake time with your natural light exposure patterns, you boost your nighttime melatonin production. This creates a strong sleep pressure by evening, helping you fall asleep faster and reach deeper restorative sleep cycles. So ironically, by getting up early, you actually optimize the very rest you're sacrificing. Now let's talk about dopamine, the brain's motivational currency. Every time you do something difficult and follow through, especially in the absence of external rewards, you trigger a release of dopamine. Not a spike, like from a stimulant or social media, but a controlled release that says, effort equals reward. This is one of the most powerful forms of neurochemical conditioning. When your brain begins to associate early wake-ups with pride, clarity, movement, and momentum, it wants to do it again. You build what's called dopaminergic momentum. The early victory spirals into a workout, reading, deep work, clean eating, and your entire day becomes a compounding sequence of wins. This isn't just a lifestyle shift, it's a full brain upgrade. A reclaiming of sovereignty over your nervous system in a world designed to hijack it. Most people wake up into reaction. They check their phone. They consume before they create. Their brain starts the day scattered, externally pulled, and internally sluggish. But when you wake up at 4 a.m., you start in command. You choose your first thoughts. You engage your brain before the world engages it for you. You build momentum before anyone even knows you're awake. The truth is this: your nervous system is listening. Every behavior you repeat is teaching it who's in charge, your higher self or your default settings. And waking up early, consistently, is one of the most powerful statements you can make. I'm not waiting for life to happen, I'm building it now. So tomorrow, when the alarm rings at 400, understand what's really happening. It's not about a number on the clock. It's about the signal you're sending to your brain, your identity, and your future. You're not just waking up early. You're reprogramming your life, one disciplined morning at a time. The decision to wake up at 4 a.m. may seem like a matter of willpower or productivity, but at its core, it's a profound biological synchronization. Your brain is not operating in isolation. It is a dynamic system attuned to time, light, hormones, and behavior. The human body is governed by circadian rhythms, 24-hour cycles that regulate everything from your sleep and energy levels to hormone release, cognitive performance, and even emotional states. These rhythms are not philosophical. They are hardwired into your hypothalamus, specifically in a region known as the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or SCN. This cluster of neurons receives input from the eyes about light and darkness and communicates that information to your entire nervous system. Around 4 a.m., the body naturally begins to prepare for waking, especially when it's attuned to a consistent sleep-wake cycle. Cortisol levels, which often carry a negative connotation, begin to rise not as a stress signal, but as a wake-up cue. This early morning cortisol spike is designed to prepare the body for alertness, to mobilize energy, and to sharpen mental focus. When you choose to wake up at 4 a.m., you are not fighting this natural rhythm. You are rising with it. You are aligning your consciousness with a biological wave that evolution designed to make you most alert and focused. You're not hacking biology, you're cooperating with it. This early alignment also supports dopamine regulation. Dopamine is a key neurotransmitter in the brain's motivation and reward systems. In the early morning hours, especially when you wake up with intention, the brain begins to generate a dopamine pathway that is not externally triggered by stimulation, but internally created through behavior. This internal generation of dopamine based on effort, getting out of bed, resisting comfort, choosing structure, creates a reward system that becomes increasingly powerful over time. It trains the brain to seek purpose and movement over passivity. In contrast, when you sleep through the cortisol wave and wake into a reactive state, your body compensates through scattered surges of adrenaline, often accompanied by a spike in anxiety or grogginess. That sluggishness is not due to lack of sleep alone. It is due to missed alignment. You've ignored your natural performance window, and your body is now trying to recalibrate without the benefit of rhythm. Furthermore, waking up at 4 a.m. activates regions of the brain that support executive function. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of logic, discipline, and planning, is particularly sensitive to behavioral cues in the first 30 to 60 minutes of the waking state. When you rise early and engage your mind deliberately, whether through reflection, reading, movement, or deep work, you stimulate neural pathways that prioritize goal-directed behavior. This doesn't just feel productive. It rewires your brain to favor intention over impulsivity. When repeated over time, early wake-ups contribute to structural changes in the prefrontal cortex, strengthening your ability to regulate mood, resist distraction, and maintain long-term consistency. All of this takes place while the world is still asleep, while external demands are silent, and while your cognitive load is at its lowest. That quiet gives your nervous system space to reset, integrate, and prepare. It's not just about being early. It's about engaging your neurobiology when it's most receptive to direction. Your brain is primed to build or break patterns in that state, and every morning is an opportunity to shape what kind of person you are becoming. Discipline is often seen as a matter of character or moral strength, but from a neuroscience perspective, it is far more biological than people realize. Every act of discipline, especially one that goes against comfort, convenience, or instinct, is a signal to your brain, not just in a metaphorical sense, but in a literal, structural way. The brain is constantly observing your behavior, collecting data, and adjusting your circuitry accordingly. When you repeatedly wake up at 4 a.m., especially when every fiber of your body wants to stay in bed, you are sending a strong neural message. I am in control of my actions. Over time, this message becomes a dominant neural pathway. You are actively strengthening your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for decision-making, impulse control, and planning, and simultaneously quieting the limbic system, which governs emotion, craving, and short-term gratification. This dynamic is often referred to in neuroscience as top-down regulation, and it is the defining feature of disciplined individuals. They are not less emotional. They are not immune to distraction. They are simply better at regulating it, and that ability is trainable, especially in the early morning hours when neural plasticity is at its peak. Repetition is key here. The brain changes through repetition more than intensity. Waking up early one day does very little for your identity or your nervous system. But doing it consistently, even just 5 to 7 days in a row, begins to form what neuroscientists call long-term potentiation, or LTP. This is the process by which synaptic connections between neurons become stronger the more they are activated together. In practical terms, this means that every time you override the urge to stay comfortable and instead act with intention, the neurons involved in that decision-making pathway grow stronger and more efficient. Eventually, it becomes easier, not because the behavior is easier, but because the brain has made it more automatic. You've shifted it from effortful to instinctive. This is the neurological basis identity shift, not telling yourself you're disciplined, but proving it at a cellular level morning after morning. Another key factor is the role of the anterior cingulate cortex, EACC, a region involved in monitoring conflict and detecting when behavior does not match goals. When you repeatedly act in alignment with your long-term values, even when it's uncomfortable, the ACC begins to quiet the internal resistance that usually accompanies difficult decisions. You stop negotiating with yourself in the dark. You stop needing motivation to get up. The decision becomes automatic because your brain trusts you to follow through. That's one of the most powerful effects of discipline on the brain. It builds internal coherence. When your actions match your goals over and over again, the brain stops resisting them. Resistance is not permanent. It's just a signal that the behavior hasn't been repeated enough times yet to become familiar. Discipline also rewires how you respond to stress. People who wake up early and start their day with intention develop what's called anticipatory regulation. Because they initiate difficult tasks proactively, their brain becomes less reactive to stress later in the day. This is supported by shifts in the autonomic nervous system, where the parasympathetic system, rest and regulation, becomes more accessible even under pressure. That means you stay calmer, clearer, and more focused when others are falling into chaos. And this is not a talent. It is a trained neurophysiological state that begins the moment you choose discomfort over delay. In waking up early, in choosing discipline first thing in the morning, you are literally forging a brain that thrives under pressure, that values action over excuse, and that begins each day with a neurological advantage the rest of the world is sleeping through. Neuroplasticity is not just a scientific term. It's the foundational principle that allows you to change who you are. Your brain is not fixed. It is not hardwired into some permanent version of yourself. It is constantly remodeling itself in response to your behavior, your thoughts, your environment, and most importantly, your decisions. The most profound shifts in your identity don't come from what you say or think about yourself. They come from what you repeatedly do, especially under friction. And waking up at 4 a.m. is one of the most powerful behavioral triggers for neuroplasticity-driven identity change, precisely because it requires consistent action in opposition to comfort. You are taking your brain into unfamiliar territory, and that is the perfect condition for rewiring. The brain changes most when it is challenged, when it is uncertain, and when it is under slight pressure, not stress, but voluntary effort. When you wake up early, especially before your mind is fully clear and your motivation hasn't yet caught up, you are initiating neuroplastic change with raw behavior alone. And that's exactly where identity is born, at the intersection of discomfort and repetition. Neurons that fire together wire together. It's a core principle in neurobiology. When you repeatedly wake at 4 a.m. and take a series of focused, intentional actions, whether it's journaling, working out, reading, or planning your day, you are not just doing productive tasks. You are pairing a new behavior with a new sense of self. You are teaching your nervous system that this is who you are now. And every time you repeat it, that signal becomes stronger. Eventually, the brain doesn't see it as a temporary habit. It sees it as part of your default operating system. This is how people go from saying, "I'm not a morning person," to becoming the person who can't imagine sleeping in. The brain adapted because the behavior gave it no choice. Now let's take this further. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is a region of the brain involved in executive functions like future planning, self-control, and behavioral alignment with long-term goals. It's also one of the most neuroplastic regions in adulthood. When you perform difficult tasks early in the day, before anyone expects you to, before external pressure kicks in, you are enhancing this region's strength and speed. The circuits involved in making disciplined decisions become more efficient. They require less energy. They resist the influence of distraction and emotional reactivity. This translates directly into your daily life. You're not just building morning discipline, you're sculpting a brain that can override impulse with intention. Over and over again, in every context. And here's something even more powerful: identity is a function of prediction. The brain constantly asks, "What kind of person am I?" And it answers based on the patterns you repeat. If you repeatedly act with intention at 4 a.m., the brain begins to anticipate that this is your pattern. Your sense of self becomes less about your past and more about your practiced future. You don't need to affirm your new identity. You've earned it through behavior. This is where neuroplasticity meets belief. What you consistently do becomes what you unconsciously believe about yourself. That belief drives future action, and the cycle reinforces itself. This is why early rising is such a catalyst for transformation. It's not just the extra hours. It's the neurological imprint of consistency, struggle, and growth embedded into the identity circuits of the brain. You don't need permission to become someone new. You need repetition under pressure. You need proof to your own nervous system that you are the kind of person who does hard things on purpose. The beauty of the 4 a.m. wake up is that it gives you this proof before the sun even rises, before the world has a chance to define you, and before doubt has a chance to speak. There is a unique neurological advantage that exists in the early hours of the morning, particularly around 4 a.m., that most people will never access simply because they're asleep. It's not just about quiet surroundings or fewer distractions. It's about what happens inside your brain when the world is still. During these hours, your brain enters a state that unlocks deep cognition, strategic planning, and internal recalibration. This isn't theoretical. It's backed by decades of neuroscience on brain rhythms, attentional networks, and what's known as the default mode network, or DMN. The DMN is a powerful neural network that activates when you're not focused on external stimuli. When the mind is inward-facing, reflective, and able to access long-range thinking. In most people's lives, the DMN is constantly interrupted by pings, emails, notifications, and conversation. But at 4 a.m., when the world is still, this system becomes fully available. And when you combine that silence with intention, you give your brain the runway it needs to think clearly, creatively, and strategically, without interruption. In this state, you are not reacting to the world, you are creating from within it. You can map your goals, reflect with clarity, and process thoughts that during the day are buried under noise. The brain is a high-frequency operating system. It does not perform at its best when overloaded with tasks or overstimulated by digital input. But in the early hours, the absence of that overload creates a vacuum for deep work. You're able to enter flow states faster, sustain focus longer, and engage more deeply with abstract or complex ideas. Your cognitive load is low, but your neural sharpness is high. That's a rare combination. It's why so many high-performing individuals across history, from scientists and philosophers to athletes and artists, have tapped into early morning hours for their greatest breakthroughs. They may not have known the neuroscience behind it, but they instinctively aligned with the biology. The brain's attentional systems also function differently in the early morning. When you wake up and immediately begin reactive behaviors, checking your phone, answering messages, jumping into urgent tasks, you activate your sympathetic nervous system. This shifts your cognitive state into vigilance, scanning, and stress. But when you wake at 4 a.m. and begin the day calmly, with focused attention on one thing at a time, you activate the parasympathetic system, promoting clarity, emotional balance, and fluid cognition. That calm alertness is one of the most valuable mental states available. It's when your brain is most capable of combining logic with creativity, memory with imagination, planning with emotional intelligence. These are the building blocks of not just productivity, but visionary leadership and life design. In addition to these benefits, early wake-ups help you avoid what's called attentional residue. Throughout the day, as you switch tasks, small fragments of attention are left behind on each previous task, slowing you down, fragmenting your focus, and draining your cognitive battery. But in the morning, before task switching begins, your attention is undivided. It's full. It's available. And when applied correctly, whether toward journaling, problem-solving, training, or creating, it yields higher quality output with less effort. This is not magic, it's neuroscience. Your brain is simply working in optimal conditions that rarely occur during the rest of the day. The world may still be sleeping at 4 a.m., but your brain is awake in a way that it rarely gets to be. There is a sharpness, a mental stillness, and a depth of processing that comes not just from waking early, but from leveraging the silence for intention. It's not about getting more done. It's about doing the most important, thinking before distraction has a chance to dilute it. The power of your mind is already there. Waking up early is just how you access it at full strength. The decision to wake up at 4 a.m. consistently doesn't just impact your behavior or mindset. It initiates a profound biological synchronization between your brain, hormones, and the rest of your body. Most people think sleep and energy are isolated to how many hours you get, but that's only part of the equation. The real secret lies in when you wake up, not just how long you sleep. Human beings are hardwired with a biological rhythm called the circadian clock, and this clock controls everything from your alertness and mental performance to your hormone levels, immune system, body temperature, and metabolism. When you choose to wake up at 4 a.m. at the same time each day, you're not just forming a habit. You're aligning your internal hormonal rhythms in a way that optimizes your energy, focus, and even emotional resilience throughout the day. One of the first hormonal processes impacted by early wake-ups is your cortisol awakening response. Now, cortisol gets a bad name because of its association with stress, but when it's properly timed, like early in the morning, it's exactly what you want. Cortisol is your natural wake-up hormone. When you rise at 4 a.m. consistently, you're riding the early peak of cortisol, which brings alertness, mental clarity, and increased physical readiness. If you sleep in or rise at inconsistent times, this wave becomes blunted or mistimed, causing you to feel groggy, slow, or anxious in the morning. Your brain didn't miss sleep. It missed synchronization. That mistiming has a cascade effect on your entire day, affecting appetite, focus, and energy levels. But when you wake up in alignment with this natural rise, you feel composed, sharp, and calm under pressure. Testosterone is another hormone closely tied to your wake-sleep rhythm. For both men and women, testosterone plays a crucial role in motivation, drive, muscle repair, and cognitive performance. Research shows that consistent early rising paired with quality sleep allows testosterone levels to peak more predictably and maintain higher baseline levels throughout the day. This is not just useful for athletic performance. It influences ambition, competitiveness, and confidence. And because testosterone is sensitive to sleep-wake disruption, erratic waking patterns can gradually suppress its production. Waking at 4 a.m. regularly while maintaining proper nighttime rest enhances hormonal balance, keeping you mentally and physically primed. Then there's melatonin, the hormone responsible for initiating and maintaining deep sleep. Many people struggle with falling asleep at night, not because of insomnia, but because their circadian system is out of alignment. When you wake up late, get sunlight too late, or overexpose yourself to screens at night, you suppress melatonin production and delay your natural sleep pressure. But when you wake at 4 a.m., you increase your exposure to early morning light, especially if you step outside. That early light is critical. It hits special cells in your retina, sends a signal to your brain's circadian clock, and sets a countdown timer for nighttime melatonin release, roughly 14 to 16 hours later. In other words, waking up early actually programs your brain to fall asleep earlier and deeper, creating a positive feedback loop that reinforces the entire rhythm. When your sleep and hormone systems are in sync, you don't just feel better, you perform better. Your metabolism becomes more efficient. Your inflammation levels go down, your mood stabilizes, your heart rate variability improves. You recover faster, think faster, and feel more emotionally grounded. And all of this starts not with supplements or hacks, but by choosing when you wake. Waking up at 4 a.m. with consistency trains your body to operate in harmony with its evolutionary blueprint. You're no longer pushing against your biology. You're harnessing it. One of the most underestimated forces in human behavior is momentum. Not just physical momentum, but neurochemical momentum. When you wake up at 4 a.m. and take immediate intentional action, you are setting a cascade in motion inside your brain that affects everything you do that day. This isn't about motivation. It's not even about willpower. It's about dopamine. Dopamine is the molecule of pursuit, motivation, and drive. It's what compels us to act, to move toward a goal, to stay locked in when things get hard. But here's what most people misunderstand. Dopamine is not just released when you receive a reward. It's released in greater quantities during the pursuit of the reward, especially when the task is hard. That's where early wake-ups become so powerful. When you rise at 4 a.m. and immediately act on a task, whether it's training, journaling, meditating, or focused work, you trigger a release of dopamine not because it feels good, but because your brain begins to associate effort with identity and outcome. That association becomes a loop. The brain begins to encode a sequence difficult task, GI effort, GAI internal reward. The more you repeat that loop, the stronger it becomes. You start to crave challenge because challenge becomes chemically satisfying. This is what's called a dopaminergic feedback loop. And it's the core of self-motivation. It's not external. No one needs to cheer you on. No one needs to push you. It becomes internalized. The reward is not the praise or the outcome. The reward is the action itself. And it all begins with that first early decision to rise before the world demands anything from you. That 4 a.m. alarm is not just a clock. It's a cue to initiate the neural circuitry of forward momentum. Now, let's look deeper at how momentum compounds. In neuroscience, there's something known as behavioral chunking. This is the process by which one small action makes the next one easier to initiate. For example, waking up at 4 a.m. leads naturally into hydration, which leads to movement, which leads to focused thinking, which leads to proactive decision making. Each action builds on the last, and the brain reinforces this sequence with dopamine at every step. When repeated, these behavioral sequences become automatic. You no longer need to think your way into them. They unfold because your nervous system has associated them with identity. You're no longer trying to be disciplined. You are the person who follows through. It's not a matter of motivation anymore. It's simply what you do. This is exactly why people who build early morning discipline often experience exponential growth, not just in productivity, but in emotional stability, health, and clarity. It's not because waking up early gives you more hours. It's because those early hours carry greater neurochemical weight. There's a purity to that window, no distractions, no interference, no decision fatigue. It's just you and your brain in its most malleable, receptive, and prime state. And when you begin your day by doing something hard voluntarily, you set the tone for the rest of the day. You teach your brain that effort is normal, that resistance is just part of the process, and that quitting isn't on the table. Over time, this becomes the baseline. Your entire nervous system recalibrates around forward motion. You gain momentum not once, but every single day. And when you live in that state of internally driven action, you begin to notice something remarkable. Tasks feel lighter, decisions become clearer, your inner critic grows quieter. You're no longer dragging yourself through the day. You're being pulled forward by a system you built, neuron by neuron, behavior by behavior. That's the power of waking up at 4 a.m. It's not about being extreme. It's about initiating a biochemical sequence that rewires how you show up for yourself every single day. When you step back and look at everything we've explored, the brain chemistry, the hormonal rhythms, the identity level shifts, and the neurological effects of discipline, one truth becomes undeniable. Waking up at 4 a.m. is not just a habit. It's a high-impact protocol for transformation. It gives you control over your biology instead of being controlled by it. It activates the deep mechanisms of neuroplasticity, allowing you to rewire how you think, how you act, and ultimately who you are. You begin the day in command of your attention, your focus, and your energy before the world has a chance to take it from you. You no longer operate from reaction. You operate from intention. This is the foundation of real change. Not motivational highs, not temporary hacks, but a deep biological recalibration of your nervous system. You are building a life not around comfort, but around clarity. Not around chaos, but around conscious discipline. And that shift doesn't require a perfect plan. It begins with one decision to wake up early, consistently, and act before the day demands anything from you. You're not chasing success. You're becoming the kind of person who creates it. You're no longer waiting for a breakthrough. You're building one every single morning. The alarm at 4 a.m. is not just a wake-up call for your body. It's a signal to your brain that this day will not be wasted. It's a message to your identity that growth is non-negotiable. And every time you choose to rise in those early hours, you are proving to yourself and to your nervous system that you are no longer the person you used to be. So when the world tells you that 4 a.m. is too early, too extreme, too uncomfortable, remember growth is always uncomfortable. But so is regret. One leads to evolution, the other to stagnation. You get to choose which discomfort you live with. The next time the alarm rings before dawn, don't see it as a burden. See it as a gateway to clarity, to discipline, to strength. Because every great life is built in the hours that no one else sees. And that transformation, it begins in the dark, quietly at 4 a.m.